Welcome into Locked On Knicks, and we are joined again by John Karalis of the Locked On Celtics podcast. And Gavin, this time around, what are we talking about with John?
We are getting into the Boston Celtics. Know thy enemy. Does Jayson Tatum have the stuff to be the number one guy on an NBA championship team? How real is their pursuit of Kevin Durant? And does John think they should trade Jaylen Brown for him? All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. We want to thank you guys for making us your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you guys making us a part of your daily routine. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. He is Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, getting into football season, the best time of the year, in my opinion, for covering sports, having once covered high school sports once upon a time. But we're not talking about high school football today. We're talking about the Boston Celtics. This episode's probably going to make some people really angry in our YouTube comments, but it's okay. We're getting the intel on the enemy. You know what I mean? It's fun to talk about the other teams, particularly in division. I struggle to call the Celtics a division rival. I begrudgingly admit a few times in this episode, they're actually a very good organization to want to model yourself after if it's 2022 and you're in the National Basketball Association. So we get the scoop from John Karalis on, where the Celtics are at right now, the moves they've made this offseason, where John thinks they slot into the championship picture again this year after a finals appearance, and a bunch of other stuff. So I won't hold this up anymore. We'll get into part 2 of our episode with John Karalis of Locked On Celtics right now.
John, 32 minutes in. Let's talk some Boston Celtics. Let's get into it.
If you ever wondered why Locked On Celtics never makes time,
no, we're right there with you, brother. We're right there with you. But I want to know what's going on with the Kevin Durant stuff. It's kind of you talk about melodrama and LOL Knicks. The LOL Nets is so much louder and crazier, and the Boston Celtics, the defending Eastern Conference champions, much to the chagrin of Jaylen Brown, are seemingly a team that is in the conversation. I know there were reports out that those talks were old, but then Shams noting today the Celtics, one of 3 teams most likely to be involved in further Kevin Durant negotiations. What's the latest on that? And where are you at on potentially dealing a stalwart like Brown? I don't want to use the phrase selling your soul because the goal is to win a title and Kevin Durant helps you win a title, but a little bit of selling your soul potentially to go get Kevin Durant.
I'm on record as saying I don't want to do this deal. I don't want to do the rumored deal. I don't want to do any Jaylen Brown deal. And it may be short-sighted. There are people who will certainly argue now's the time. Kevin Durant, go get him, put him next to Jayson Tatum. You may have to give up a piece or two, but Kevin Durant makes up for that and blah, 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 and you increase your chances. It doesn't mean that you actually win a championship. Like people make their argument as if, hey, you just go win your championship now. Like having Kevin Durant in your team doesn't automatically give you a championship. I think we've seen that. The Celtics just swept Brooklyn, and he had success obviously in Golden State with a lot of extra help, but Kevin Durant's been on some really good teams that didn't win championships. So I push back on the people who say you got to do it because you got to win a championship now and you worry about later. Celtics were just in the finals. So obviously there's no guarantee that you get back to the finals right away, but the Celtics have Jaylen Brown at 25, Jayson Tatum at 24. These guys are just starting to touch their prime, and they are exceptional two-way players. Tatum obviously is a first-team All-NBA guy. Jaylen Brown is not that far, I don't think, from being considered for a third-team All-NBA. Like he could be an All-NBA guy. I mean, he has some health issues, but he's had stretches in the playoffs, in the regular season, months at a time where he's been better than Jayson Tatum.
In the finals, most notably.
In the finals, right? And so he has plenty of talent. And there's a reason why the Brooklyn Nets would want him in a deal with Boston. When you scan the league and you say, what players do you want in return for Kevin Durant? Jaylen Brown, if he's available, is one of the top guys that you can get, depending on your opinion of the other guys. I have believed from the beginning, when Woj dropped the bomb at 2:30 or 2 in the morning on a Sunday going into Monday, that this has all been Brooklyn driven, trying to get Boston involved in order to drive up the price so they can try to shake Scotty Barnes free from Toronto, or Ingram from New Orleans. And I just don't see the Celtics as desperate enough. The latest Shams report, where he ends it with these big Boston overtures, how Kevin Durant's become close with Ime Udoka and really developed some respect for Ime as a coach from Team USA and from the year that he was in Brooklyn. And it's like, really the selling point, it feels like, well, Brooklyn's people are very much putting it out there like, hey, he's asking out now after he's signing a 4-year deal. He's not going to disrespect Ime. He likes Ime. But I don't know, man. I look at it, I understand that he's Kevin Durant, but I also understand that he's 36 and you're going to be paying him almost $60 million as a 38-year-old. And with his injury history, with his level of the way he treats the franchises, I just don't like it. I don't like it. I'd rather go to battle with the two young guys currently on the roster than, like you said, sell your soul in an attempt to win it. Because if you don't, the downside is, if you don't win with Kevin Durant and you've traded away too much, and it's hard to put your team back together because you're paying him so much money, and Jayson Tatum's deal happens to have an opt-out in year one of that new TV deal that you mentioned, Alex, that Tatum's going to be one of the guys that signs that contract, that first contract with the new TV money, which Lord knows he might end up getting paid $100 million in 1 year for all we know. If you have that much money tied up in a failing franchise, why would Tatum resign? You have the potential for Tatum to go away, for you to be left with the shell of your franchise. I don't like it. I don't like the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario with keeping Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum is, in a couple of years, Jaylen Brown decides he doesn't want to re-sign. You have to trade him, and then you can trade him for 1 million picks and or potentially another all-star player, and you try to do it without missing a beat. But that's a much more palatable worst case scenario. He wants to go to Atlanta and go home to Atlanta. All right, well, let's see what Atlanta's got at that time. Maybe they've got some pieces that fit, and the Celtics continue their run with different pieces. I don't know. Very long-winded way for me to say I don't want Kevin Durant. I don't think it makes sense. The Celtics aren't desperate enough to give up what Brooklyn wants, and I think it's all a ploy from Sean Marks to get bigger returns from other teams. And I really don't see the Celtics involved in any way other than as a potential third team or fourth team to try and pick off a reasonably good piece with one of their traded player exceptions that could help them and help bolster their bench to make their run with Tatum and Brown.
Well, it's a really interesting saga with Durant that we're going to see unfold here in the coming weeks, because shortly before we started recording this, Joe Tsai comes out on Twitter to announce that he's backing Sean Marks and Steve Nash over Kevin Durant, effectively. At least that's the impression of the tweet, Kevin. He tweeted like, "I fully stand by my front office and coaching staff."
So they're out.
Yeah, we will continue building the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah, it could be one way or the other. It could be damage control, or it could.
Let me ask you guys: How does Steve Nash come back from this? How does Steve Nash say, "You know what? I am going to coach this"? If I'm Steve Nash, I'm like, you know what? I don't need this crap, right?
I
Just
mean, I
I'm
guess
out.
yeah. All right, we'll be right back with John talking more about the Celtics, including whether he thinks they slot in the same general position for the championship picture this year, and whether he thinks Jayson Tatum can be a number one option on a team that wins a championship, that doesn't just make it to the finals, but actually wins, especially after his cruddy year this year in the finals. So we'll get into that in just a second. But I got to remind you guys, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. And if you haven't tried Built Puffs yet, you're really depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There is a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite cookie dough chunk puffs. Have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks. And of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. You get all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. So run to built.com to snag a box for you and the family. It will be the perfect treat, or you can find a really good hiding place and hoard them all for yourself. Like all Built Bars, the new cookie dough chunk puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means they're healthy and tasty. Chocolate covered cookie dough with a light, fluffy texture. So good. And what's great about Built is that all their bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. So go to built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you can get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. I guess the last person, so you could argue for one that Nash has never truly gotten to coach how he wants, I guess, because he's been so under the thumb of Kyrie and KD. So maybe that's something that interests him, to be like, oh, I would love a stress-free environment where I could just coach. But then the other side of that coin is, it's like, even if he winds up getting fired eventually from the Nets, if he still wants to be in coaching, I mean, if he could put together a good season or two still with the Nets without Durant and Irving, and then eventually gets canned, like Kenny Atkinson found work again and was going to be head coach of the Hornets before Jordan seems like cheaped out on that deal. But like, there'll be work for him if he wants it. I think he'll probably go to like commentary or something. So to be honest, he's probably gonna be like, I'm over this whole coaching crap, man.
He doesn't need it.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
But I think we can finish up, John, just with some final thoughts on the Celtics, because as Knicks fans, look, as much as it sucks to admit, the Celtics are a team that is a team to look up towards and be like, I would love if my team could be like that team right now. They've made some prudent decisions, especially like with moving Brad Stevens to the front office, installing Udoka as the head coach, and the little moves that they made this season that really put them in that position to make it to the finals. The moves they've made this offseason, like getting Malcolm Brogdon for what I thought was really not much, like a pretty great upside bet there, for a guy that could even potentially come in off your bench or something if you want to try to keep him healthy. But how do you feel about the moves they made this offseason, and how do you feel about the Celtics going into next season, as where they rank in the hierarchy of teams that could compete for a championship next year?
Yeah, I mean, I put them right in that class at the top of the East for sure. I mean, Milwaukee, I think Philly has the potential to be in there. Miami obviously finds their way into the top four kind of all the time, no matter what. We'll see what they do if they make a trade. But I think Boston's in that mix for sure. I think starting with the moves this season, getting Brogdon, like you said, for the best player going out in that deal was Daniel Tice. So that was a great deal. It was a deal that if you proposed it to me on Twitter with the trade machine and said, who said no, I might have blocked you. Like, this is just so outrageous to even suggest a, what was it, 5-for-1 trade. I'm like, no, that'll never happen. And it did. So she goes to, shows you what I know. But I consider that, like, they had the big Evan Fournier traded player exception. I kind of equated it to, they basically used that to get Brogdon, because it worked out the same. And it was kind of weird how that happened. But I think Brogdon is a great pickup, because he can play 1, 2, or 3, giving Tatum and Brown a little extra time to ramp up, giving Brogdon his fair share of minutes without overloading him too much and trying to keep him healthy, making sure that he was cool coming off the bench, which he has promised that he is, and not upsetting Marcus Smart, who is in. I like him as the starting point guard, and I think he's kind of a little sensitive about that spot. It took him a long time to get to that starting point guard spot, and to immediately bring in Malcolm Brogdon had the potential to be a little iffy there. But knowing that he's coming off the bench, kind of was like, okay, that's good then. So I think Brogdon can be really, really helpful. He obviously can be a great spot up shooter, as well as a guy who can run the pick and roll. So that helps. The Celtics lost in the finals because they had no depth at all, and they ran out of gas. They ran Tatum and Brown to the point where they just didn't have it anymore. I think all of those turnovers that we saw were a product of those guys trying to do way too much with no gas left. So this is going to help that. Gallinari is going to help that a bit, and we'll see what the Celtics do. They still have 2 traded player exceptions for almost $6 and almost $7 million. So, and they've got Peyton Pritchard, who's an interesting young player that could maybe grease the wheels on a skid, grease the skids for a trade of a bench player, an upgraded center spot maybe. So they still have tools to even upgrade during the course of the regular season. So I like where they are. I loved the hiring of Ime Udoka, and it worked out perfectly. He's exactly what they needed. I didn't think coaching was an issue after the Brad Stevens kind of Danny Ainge thing, but and it wasn't an issue. But this is just also the shakeup was good for them, and Udoka is just. There are a lot of teams that didn't hire him. They're just looking, they have to be walking around their front offices going like, we passed on this guy. I think he's just great at the NBA level, dealing with players, the accountability and all of that stuff. That's been big. And Brad Stevens, a pleasant surprise in the front office role. I wasn't sure, but he's, coming out of college, we all saw him as a coach, but recruiting and getting guys to, building a team is part of a college coach's, responsibility. So this was still something that he had to do in the past, and it's worked out. I like how he's approaching things, and he's a little bit more liberal with trading the first round picks than Danny Ainge was. And I think that this is the right situation to do that. So far, so good. I no complaints. I think these guys are a really good team. They're really well run. The owners are spending money at the right time. So everything's on the upswing, and with a little bit of luck and hopefully some better health, the Celtics have the chance to be right back where they were this past June and getting a chance to win a championship.
I think I can guess your answer given that he was 2 games away from doing it, but do you feel like heading into next season after a disappointing finals and a grueling run to get to that point that Jayson Tatum is ready to be the number 1 guy on a championship team?
I mean, yeah, I do think so. I think the loss will be in a way good. Like I've seen being in the room with Tatum after loss after loss after loss over the course of the regular season. Like they started out 18-21. It was so disappointing. And even in the year,
wait, really quick to point out the nadir of that, the RJ Barrett buzzer beater.
Yes, absolutely. They point to that game.
Had to get that in there
very often. They point to that game every single time. So yes, you can bask in the glow. You had a little hand in that. But Tatum has always been very cool about the loss. He's like, look, this is the NBA. Losses happen. Basically, we didn't want to lose, but sometimes you lose and you got to learn from it and move on. He was just very, not cavalier, but he takes it in stride. He's always good about that. And then after the finals loss, I mean, I've just never seen him in that kind of space. And it was kind of interesting to see. I mean, it's exactly where you want a guy to be in that situation. but it was still interesting to see because you don't really see him like that very often. And I'm just hope that he and Jaylen Brown like take the things that they did wrong to heart, understand why, and take this offseason to build on that stuff and come back better than they were before. So he's still 25 or 24. These guys are still young. There are still lessons, but obviously you want to win the championship, right? But I think if they had won the championship, that would have been obviously great, but I think it might have like solidified some bad habits. I maybe optimistically think that losing this one could maybe mean winning an extra one later and maybe be more successful because of the lessons that it taught these guys. It gives Ime Udoka that extra hammer to hold over them. So I as much as the loss was disappointing, I think coming out of it, these guys can all be better. And I think the internal improvement is a big reason why they'll be right back where they were.
All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. So, John, thanks so much for coming on, giving us, first off, some great perspective on Danny Ainge, talking through the Brunson thing and everything, and giving us the opinions on the Knicks. And then just talking about the Celtics. As I said, much to the chagrin of Knicks fans, a good organization to want to model yourself after in the NBA and obviously a division rival. So, a team that we like to keep an eye on. So appreciate, the perspective on them going into this, as you said, don't remind me, fast approaching new NBA season. It feels like the last one just ended somehow, and we're in like month 3 of the off season. But at any rate, other than the Locked On Celtics podcast, and of course, at John_Karalis on Twitter, is there anywhere else you want to let people know where to find your work and all that good stuff?
Yeah. I mean, obviously Locked On NBA as well. So talking about the league as a whole and my work on Boston Sports Journal, little more abstract stuff in the off season, but I am particularly happy about the piece I just wrote about comparing eras. I think that's something that any team, the fan of any team can appreciate. I think comparing eras can be good and give people a really good perspective on what used to be. So hopefully people check that out as well.
The cameo, John. You got to hammer the cameo.
Yeah, the cameo. Yeah, pay me $15 to say stupid things.
Yeah, if you can pay him to say the Knicks are exactly. Yeah. We're on the same page. All right, we'll wrap up on that. Thanks so much, John. We'll catch up with you soon.
You got it, guys. Thanks.